Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to you, dear viewers, from here inside NATO headquarters in Brussels. My name is Jamie Shea. I'm a former NATO official, and today I'm delighted to be back at NATO in order to have this armchair conversation with NATO's new chief scientist, Steen Søndergaard. So Steen, a warm welcome and thanks for giving me the opportunity to come back to NATO today and to interview you, but more importantly to have this conversation with you about the future of NATO's science and technology. Now, dear viewers, any of you who follow security and defence questions regularly or closely, I don't have to tell you about the critical role that science and technology play in NATO's security and defence. That has always been the case, arguably, and we'll find out from Sten in a moment, it's even more important today than ever. But I think what we want to learn from the chief scientist is not just why they are important, but how science and technology are important. How are these two critical areas evolving at a time of rapid technological change? And which areas of science and technology in particular are critical for NATO's ability to carry out its missions, both now, today, and in the future? Which technologies are evolutionary, where NATO pretty much has to build on past endeavours, but which ones are revolutionary, new things out there on the horizon that NATO still has to grasp, understand and exploit? And of course, dear viewers, as you all know, in the area of science and technology, it's not just how you use these for your own defence, but how you block your adversary from using that science and technology successfully against you. So how do you also defend in part against science and technology? So those are the sort of the key questions that we're going to explore with the chief scientist today. But first, let's get to know the person, the man behind the role, the man behind the job. Steen Søndergaard, you're from Denmark. But tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this business in the first place, what motivated you, a little bit about your career to date. And finally, in this opening sort of exchange, Steen, could you tell us if you always thought that you would end up as chief scientist at NATO? Was this something that you were consciously looking at, preparing for, or did it sort of happen a little bit by happen chance? Over to you.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you and good morning to everyone. Yeah, Steen Søndergaard, the new chief scientist, and I could say I basically grew up in this NATO Science and Technology Organization, before that the Research and Technology Organization, and before that the Defense Research Group. And when I graduated in 1988, Master of Science in Telecommunication and Digital Signal Processing, I had to join the military service. So I had to go in there. So after that, I went into the Danish Armed Forces, spent there 2 or 3 months, and then we had a special arrangement at that time that you could actually serve as a scientist or a lawyer as a military service within the Danish system.
Yeah, so it was an easy choice if it was between being a lawyer and a scientist.
Exactly, yeah. So I went in there, and then just after a year in that system, I was exposed to this international organization of meeting with researchers, engineers, and other bright talents working on the same topics and problems. And now, 35 years after, I'm still working in that system, basically. But what I have learned over the years being involved in this one was that I grew up in this system. I deal with a lot of different research arenas, conferences, symposiums, trials, testing. I've been heavily involved in other NATO activities, such as the main armaments group.
So you were sort of coming to NATO to represent Denmark on various sort of scientific or technological committees and boards?
And also representing other types of military testing within the main armaments group, the Ballistic Missile Defense Steering Committee, and have also been strongly supported the Diana initiative and all of that sorts. And then basically, now I've been playing with all the different types of instruments we have in the science and technology organizations, been working on the different levels. When I also moved up as a senior scientist to a senior scientific advisor, and then further on to the department head. That ended up being the head and the director of our Defence Research Center in Denmark, and also the chief scientific advisor for our National Armaments Director and our director of Acquisition and Logistics Organization. And I've been working both, let's say, with scientists, academia, industry, startups, but I've also been working heavily on the big acquisition campaigns in Denmark, and also supporting the warfighters at missions.
So you make the link, as it were, which we'll come back to later in the conversation, between sort of pure science, pure research, but also what I would call exploitation or development,
exactly.
bringing, if you like, to the market, because that's key, right?
It is.
There's not much use having knowledge if you're not able to use it.
Yeah. So actually, going back to your question, Jamie, is that I played with all those different instruments. And then actually, the last 10 years, I was a Danish principal in the Science and Technology Board, and also been working with the governance part of STO. And then when Brian was about to end his tenure, the possibilities came up.
Yeah, that's Dr. Brian Wells, of course, who was your predecessor as chief chief scientist. So what we've established is that you are super qualified for this position, and you know NATO already. So there was a kind of natural pathway to become NATO's chief scientist. But now that you've been here, Sten, for a few months, when did you take up the
1st of July?
1st July, beginning of the summer. You've had a chance to get your feet under the desk. What do you think? What's your first impressions of NATO? You know, going from the national system to a pretty complex alliance of 32 member states, a big. Not maybe the biggest bureaucracy, but nonetheless a significant bureaucracy here inside NATO. How well have you adapted? And you know, what sort of similarities and contrasts have you discovered with the system back home in Denmark?
Good question, Jamie. I would say I thought, and I think I have the fundament learning, and I have good knowledge about NATO with 35 years as, let's say, a national representative in different types of arenas. But I would say now coming into the NATO system, I'm impressed by the complexity of NATO, with all the different stakeholders from divisions, the different areas, the brands, the offices, and so forth. But also I'm every day very impressed by meeting so very great and skilled talents and people with the whole organization. And I'm greatly supported by the Office of the Chief Scientist staff, and I have a fantastic collaboration with the Collaborative Support Office in Paris, and also with the Center for Maritime Research and Experimentation in La Spezia, and not to forget our 8 scientific and technological committees where all the scientists are in. So I feel that we are working very closely and very well together, and have great support with all this. And also comparing that big organization with, let's say, where I come from in Denmark, we have processes, we have policies, we have procedures, making sure that all 32 nations are in alignment and stuff like that. And we might have, let's say, in Denmark, been more used to have from a decision to doing and implementing. Maybe sometimes it's a little shorter. It's only one nation to convince there. So there's something there, but I think also we can work very fast when needed. That's my impression. And I think that's a lot of things working fantastic here in NATO, and I'm very impressed by what we do, and still learning. I'm learning every day, and I'm more than eager to learn even more.
You mentioned Brian Wells, your predecessor, and I know that when somebody comes into a leadership role, a new leadership role, and you've had a predecessor, in fact not one, if I remember, a couple of predecessors in the chief scientist role, which has existed, I think, now for well over a decade in NATO. At least I remember dealing with the first chief scientist when I was still on the NATO staff. When you look at the work of your predecessors, but you think of, what I want to do as the new leader, there's always this balance, isn't there, between continuity, I'm going to keep this is good, we'll build on this, change. Not that your predecessors were doing things badly, but you're your own man, you've got your own experience, your own ideas, and of course you want to make your mark. So there's probably things where you feel, well, we could do this better, or this is something that maybe my predecessor didn't do and I feel that it should be done. So how do you see this balance between simply continuing what the sort of the current pathway, but again in this extremely helter-skelter world of innovation, science, technology, things happening so quickly? How do you sort of see your own sort of agenda for changing things a little bit?
Yeah, we are in a good path. We have formed a very good pathway, but science and technology change and progress every day, every minute, every second. And being a part of the Science and Technology Board for 10 years, having been a part of this, let's say, path already been set, I think there's a lot to continue on. We have a lot of good activities already started. But I would say, of course, all those values already been set by Dr. Brian Wells and his predecessors will continue. But also I think it's important that we every day is fit for purpose and S&T for impact. I think it's more important than ever these days. And we should have an open mindset, making sure that we adapt all the great ideas from industry, startups, non-traditional stakeholders that we might not have been active so much together with before should continue. We have the STEM Forward and stuff like that. And so that's important, but also I think it's important that we create and keep strengthening the link between innovation and innovators, capability development and developers, but also all the guys implementing all those capabilities out there, and the warfighters, and the feedback.
Yeah. Please tell us more about the STEM initiative as we go forward, because I think our audience will be delighted to hear about that. Everything that NATO is doing in a practical way, individual programs, I think are great interest. But would it be fair for me to say, and if it's not fair, please correct me, because I'm certainly not a scientist or a technology expert, but the NATO has good knowledge, good awareness of what's going on, but you still see a gap in terms of what speed of implementation, speed of exploitation, or the ability of NATO to sort of process this knowledge and draw conclusions and say, well, in that case, this is what we have to do and this is where we need to go. Is that a gap that, particularly, as I said earlier, you seem to have, in your own career, balanced the pure science with development and implementation? Is that an area where you feel that you can make a difference?
I think that, of course, science and technology takes time. Science and research, it can not just happen overnight. Yeah. Ideas can happen overnight. Talking with colleagues can happen over days. And then you start developing things. So of course we should do all our best to, let's say, take all the low-hanging technology fruits and turn that into innovation and put that into fast, rapid adoption and capability development. That's for sure. But at the same time, we should also make sure that we prepare the next innovation, the next capability development. So at the same time, we should also be focus on creating the new technologies to be exploit the supply chain of all this. And that's based on science. So of course, time is of essence. And of course, we should do our utmost to support all this. But at the same time, we should also prepare for the future. So it's a kind of
it's a balance between the two.
Yeah. And that's an important balance to think here, because if we have, let's think one situation to an end, have innovate on all this technology out there right now, tried all different corners, all new things, and maybe use known technologies in new ways.
Yes, that's
fantastic,
important.
And that's very good, and we see that in Ukraine daily.
Yeah, we'll come back to that, of course.
We'll come back to
before
that one.
we close. Yes.
And then I think it's important that we keep pushing in those new technologies based on science. So we can do better on the short term, but we should also prepare for the long term.
I know that any of our viewers who sort of go on the NATO website and look at the NATO organigram, the chart of the organisation, will see that there's a lot of different agencies and divisions that seem to deal with science and technology. The Science and Technology Organization in Paris, Brussels, and you're going there, I understand, this week, La Spezia in Italy. That's quite a big organization. We've got Allied Command Transformation, one of the supreme Allied commands over in Norfolk, Virginia, with something which I used to be involved with called the NATO Science for Peace and Security program. We've got divisions in NATO like defense investment that deal with capabilities. So, if I could sort of ask you a frank question, how does the chief scientist fit into this complicated picture? Are you the overall boss and supremo of all of these efforts in terms of directing or setting the policy? Is your role to be the super coordinator or the stimulator in terms of ideas? But how do you interact with all of these other people in NATO in doing science and technology in a way that prevents duplication and tries to make the overall effort coherent? So tell us a little bit about the added value. I mean, this job I mentioned was created over a decade ago, but it wasn't there in 1949 when NATO was first created. So how do you see the value of somebody like you as chief scientist in terms of pulling all of these different strands together?
We have recently been endorsed the new NATO Science and Technology strategy for the whole science and technology enterprise. And that was being, let's say, created by us with support from all the S&T enterprises, both in Norfolk, both in HQ and other places in the NATO system. And we have drafted, created, endorsed a very strong strategy. And now comes the easy part, implementing that.
Yes.
And that's where we will have kind of a guiding, coordinating role in all that, doing this. So it has been, I think, we are there in a very good position to do all this. We have a kind of an overview of all this. And I think together with all the other stakeholders, we will together make it fantastic on the science and technology supporting the NATO missions. And we are, let's say, overwhelmed by a lot of extra tasks these days, both in the HQ, request for doing extra things, and at a rapid speed. We have, for that reason, developed a kind of a rapid, fast response to that with developing a pool of experts. And then we have to take other initiatives to, let's say, create more interest into our organizations, stimulate that the young professionals come into our organization and work with us, like, for example, the STEM Forward initiative.
What exactly is that then, STEM?
Yeah, that's the science.
STEM, of course, is science, technology, engineering,
and mathematics. Yeah. It's an initiative to attract all different talents, all types of people into our network. Also people who are not normally involved in it. For example, we have the Women and Girls in Science challenges, and that has been overwhelmed by interest. And right now we have set up a kind of a LinkedIn profile with more than 350 people working there every day in that LinkedIn
so
profile.
Still not enough women in
still working on that, Aaron, to get the balance right.
Yeah.
To map how it looks like this. And also we have done a lot of, let's say, challenges and try to get more interest into this one here. And also making sure that this is bridged into the innovation initiatives and working a lot with that. And we have, within innovation, we also have been involved and are involved in the strategic foresight, wargaming, and all those kind of activities.
That's interesting.
And that's and so I could say that we try to coordinate, stimulate the whole enterprise, but also inject with the science and tech relevant for all types of activities.
So there's the kind of knowledge bit at the top, ideas and knowledge. Then there's the strategy, making sure that NATO has some sort of pathway or coherent plan through all of this, knows where it's going. Then you've got the coordination of all of the various parts. And then finally, you've got to sort of look at implementation and sort of, put the point on things that need to go faster or need to go better, to whip the organisation. Whip maybe is too strong a word for NATO at least, but at least get the organisation to react, to move.
But also, let's say, demonstrate for the nation that it's worthwhile investing resources in the whole organization.
Right.
For example, in the STO, let's say the engine of the STO is nations participating in all the different research activities with more than 5,000 people.
Yeah, because obviously you need national resources, national inputs. So your job is to sort of incentivize the nations to, in their own interest, of course, as well as NATO to contribute.
And for example, I will give you one example of what we have done nationally in Denmark, for example. In the early days, something like detecting drones could have been interest. So we put in, there was a lot of startups in Denmark with this one. And there was one company who seems to be founding a good technology. But we're missing, is that the right way to go? Where can I talk with people? Because Denmark is a small country. We don't have maybe all the skilled personnel. And then we said, hey, why not go in and work with some of the research task groups in there.
All right, so
in Denmark.
So you're the kind of matchmaker, as it were.
So it's kind of a matchmaking, and you go into this, and then work with that for those 3 years a normal research task group takes. And they gained another knowledge. They talked with, let's say, like-minded people from other nations, and came back with, let's say, increased knowledge, better competences. And it's fair to say that this company starts with maybe 5 to 6 people, now 400 to 500, and all what they're selling today is going somewhere.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that. That's a good example. So that's clear. Well, we've looked at the man, we've looked at the role, and now, of course, let's go to the science and technology. So I think what the viewers would like to know is, of all of the sort of myriad different areas of scientific research, advance, or all of the different technologies, bioengineering, biotech, quantum AI. I don't need to tell you this, but there's a baffling number of different things out there. So what are the technologies on your radar screen? I mean, I imagine you're going to say everything, but what are the, when you look at NATO's particular tasks today, security, defence, collective defence, ramping up its military forces, getting them in a higher state of readiness. What are the crucial technologies that you've got on your radar screen, your watch list today, where you think, these are the things that we need to sort of really take a deep dive into? And can I ask you also, Steen, if you would hazard a scorecard of where you think NATO is doing well? We've got a grip on that, but if you go to bed at night and can't get to sleep because you're worried that NATO is behind or not gripping something, or what would that be in terms of the scorecard? I remember when I was a NATO staffer, we always used this traffic light system. I suppose NATO still does. Green, it's going well. Amber, we're making progress, but there are bumps in the road. And you remember red, we're completely stuck. So what would be your traffic light system?
Okay, should we start with the scorecard?
Yes, whatever. But I think this is what clearly we need to talk about. Yeah,
and that's a difficult one, isn't it? I think if you just go back to some of our fantastic fathers of nature and science, Albert Einstein, saying that in the mindset of every crisis lies great opportunities, and I think that's the case we have today, right? I think, bottom line up front, NATO is a B, maybe a B+. We have been tested our resilience and readiness for support crisis. We are standing strong at NATO. We are very clear. We have welcomed happily new allies. We have adopted most comprehensive defense plan since the Cold War. We support heavily Ukraine. And while making a forward-looking approach to security challenges. So I think we are there. Can we do better? Everybody can do better.
Yes.
So that's why an A is not normally easy to get, right?
You have to deserve it.
So there could be room to improve. And I think what we can do and support in that role, seen from the science and technology, is look into those emerging technologies. What are those? How could that impact the way we operate the way we do business and stuff like that? And with the let's say, the whole NATO S&T enterprise, with our strategy just being endorsed, now ready to be implemented, I think we are standing on a good footprint. And also, we should be very much aware of what we call the research security, making sure that our values, our knowledge, what we have gained in working together, stay in the network of trusted allies only.
When I was at NATO, it was still in those days, very much things like, cyber defence and cyber security. AI wasn't really yet sort of very much on the scene, but we were grappling nonetheless then with the multiplication of domains. When I started my NATO career back in the 80s, nobody ever remembers so far back, but I do. We basically had the traditional land, sea, and air. And then afterwards, along came space, and then along came cyber. Now we also seem to have added a sixth one, implicitly, if not explicitly, which is data and digital and AI and quantum, all of the sort of processing of information, which also, of course, leads to information war and information campaigns, propaganda, disinformation, fakes, deep fakes, and all of the rest. When you look at these domains, do you think that there's one, like space, for example, which is overwhelmingly more important than the others? Are there technologies out there which allow you to get better at land, get better at sea, get better at air cyber, all at once, if you like, sort of real game changers, real war winners? If you can get that right, you get multiple benefits, as opposed to you get that right and you just get one benefit. So, it'd be interesting to learn which specific technologies you see as the key game changers here.
Yeah. I would say that all this hybridization of warfare, mosaic warfare, is of great importance, all the multi-domains. So, of course, we have the space, cyber, and cognitive domains emerging. And if you go into space, for example, it's critical for both the civilian and the military. And in the civilians, the space systems, it's a normal part of our daily work, that they live, our GPS systems and all that. And it's more than 50% of what we're doing is dependable on space today. And space
as much as that already. Yeah.
And also for the military, all our communications, navigation, surveillance, reconnaissance, warning systems and stuff like that has something to do with space. And also the geopolitical competition and weaponization of space is something we have to be very much aware of. Going into cyber, it's modern warfare today. It's a daily war. In milliseconds, microseconds, we have a cyber war going on. And this non-kinetic thing in cyber, with attacks, disruptions into our systems, cyber attacks and stuff like that, networks and infrastructure makes us extremely vulnerable. So working with that domain is something we should just continue on. And the digital transformation of NATO, I think that will be a huge impact on this one. And then we have the cognitive domain coming in, and brain. We are basically in a kind of a brain war. Brain is the target on the weapon.
Brain war. That's a good concept, a good way of putting it.
But it is that because it's mindset. Let's say in the battle space in the Ukraine, it's new mindsets. Okay, how can we then compete with this new way a UAV system is working on? Great ideas coming from the other ones, and then so it's a kind of a brain war we're in there. And then the civilian implications we have, being very much dependent on civilian produced technologies, impact the way we operate in the military. So all this dual use theme we should take very seriously and make sure that we understand the implication of.
Innovation is a key word, of course, here, and I noticed last week that the Pentagon made an announcement that they were going to talk less, we'll see, to the major defence contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, the Boeing, the ones that have been around since time immemorial, and they were going to, because of the need to speed up innovation, talk more to those civilian tech companies, the startups, the venture capital market investing quickly, and everybody seems now to be obsessed with innovation. whatever it really means, or at least doing it faster. And you mentioned Ukraine. I mean, is this also where you feel NATO has to go? You know, talk more to the startups and to the guys in the garage in Silicon Valley, you know, and try to get in earlier to see what's going on and identify promising things earlier, and then, you know, fund them. You mentioned at the beginning Diana, the Defence Defence Innovation, accelerator for the North Atlantic, which, as the viewers probably know, but is a new venture where NATO is going to sort of invest in promising technologies together with private sector companies, or the NATO Innovation Fund up in The Hague. So could you tell us a little bit more about how they're adding value to NATO's ability to innovate, and your own sort of role maybe in interacting? I mean, they obviously learn from you, you learn from them. How does it work? You mentioned Ukraine too, so this is a bit of a long question, and I apologise for this, Sten, but you know, what specific lessons do you think, apart from, you know, obviously admiring Ukraine for its ability to stand at war and innovate, you know, we all admire that, but what can NATO take from that in the immediate sense and in terms of improving its own innovation? I mean, I'm always struck by the fact that, you know, Ukraine can produce a new long-range drone in literally a year or slightly more, whereas some NATO allies have been working for 17 years already on a medium altitude long-range drone. 17 years, and still not managed to get it through the procurement cycle. So how can we sort of, you know, speed all this up? What do you think innovation really means for NATO?
My background, when I was in Denmark as the director of our research center, we have what you call a co-funding scheme, kind of a research and innovation funding scheme. And there we have developed the system mechanism to attract startups. And now we are putting more venture capital into this, working with industry, government, and academia. Also, let's say, the whole of academia, put them and their interest into the defense and security scheme, because we need their brains, their ideas, their experience. And I think right now in Ukraine, the industry have the experience. And we have to learn and adapt. What does that mean in a governmental aspect these days? Innovation, it's the new word. In the old days, it was maybe test and experimentations, and we do demonstration of technologies. And now we say, okay, now we put that into a product as quickly as it can do and can be done. And that's important. And with the way the thing is working today in Ukraine as a drone war, swarming and counter-drone war, some of these technologies, let's say, it doesn't take a long time to create. It's something you can do in a garage, or do through a 3D printer with some Raspberry Pis, CPUs and stuff like that, and put that together and some programming, and then you can up running. And we should learn for all this, but we should also be aware of, is that the type of nature we will see in the future? So we should always have an eye on the emerging disruptive technologies, making sure that we, let's say, cover the whole arena also in science and tech, and only just focus on what is on today. But I mean that, of course, we should do all what we can to support Ukraine in all type of technologies relevant out there, and learn from them to make us better for the future also.
Did the Ukrainians sort of come here and brief you? I imagine it's not so easy, given the circumstances, to go to Kiev. I know people do go there, of course. But
we are in close dialogue with Ukraine,
And how about with industry more generally, particularly the startups? And, you know, are they interested in talking to NATO? Are they easy to reach out to? Are they willing to sort of, you know, discuss their thoughts and their ideas with you?
Of course, let's say the Diana construct were more or less made to attract the startup, and with the NATO Innovation Fund. But it's not, let's say, it's not a big pot of money there. But we have been working in the NATO Science and Technology Organization with startups and industry and academia also for years. And I think it's important that we bond these together in the future and also learn from all the Diana initiatives. But because not all of those activities ends up being a product and then a unicorn arrives. Some will, hopefully, but many would not. But what about all this thing being created there? Where does that end? Could that be something being fit into the NATO STO and having another go and see what that could fit into for future? So continuing being extremely close with the innovation and the activities there, but of course all this close cooperation with the startups, industry, academia as such is highly important. But also we should be aware of if it's only dual use and if not being done in a kind of protected ways, then do we then have, let's say, the added value, because the dual use product could basically also be in the area of the potential adversaries.
I'll come back to this in a moment.
So I think that's something we also, Jamie, have to look carefully into.
There's always another football team on the pitch
exactly,
while you're trying to organise your own team, of course, to move forward. You have to think of the others. Stan, we don't have a great deal of time left, so I'm going to have to run through my final questions briefly, but there's still a few things I'd like to ask you. I mean, we've talked about drones, so perhaps we don't have to come back to this, but it's so much the hot button issue at the moment in the wake of what your own country, Denmark, has experienced with the temporary shutdown of Copenhagen airport, and other allied countries have also had the same phenomenon of these mysterious drones flying around. Of course, we've had the incursion into Poland, so there's a big scramble on to get round this issue. As the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has put it, that you can't carry on using F-35s with missiles costing plus $1 million to shoot down sort of $3,000, $5,000 drones. There's a great push now to find quick fixes, technological solutions. How's yourself and your own sort of community at NATO trying to respond to this? Let's come up with something quickly, a challenge.
Yeah. I would say the UAV and counter-UAV is not a new topic, something we have, let's say, had on the radar that could have an impact on the battlefield as it is today. I think the defense ministers just a few days ago have implemented additional counter-drone measures into the field, and we need to include more testing under the Eastern Century. But also to ramp up defense against any incursions is important. As also the section talked about Denmark, is that the powerful example of readiness, praising corporations, 9 allies plus Ukraine, and actually Ukraine coming up to Denmark supporting with all their experience. I think that's the feedback loop, which I started talking about, is crucial here. But also cooperation with the EU as much as possible is something we
as they spend more money on sort of capability programs.
Yeah, exactly. That needs to be looking definitely into. And then STOs, our own collaborative program of work, we have numerous examples of different ways of detecting UAVs, active, passively, countering active, passively, and stuff like that. So we're doing a lot of that.
Yeah, so we're onto it. We're onto it.
We are definitely onto it. Yeah. We are definitely onto it.
You mentioned, of course, potential adversaries, real adversaries. A lot of talk about Russia, China, and in technology as well. When I was at NATO, particularly during the Cold War, the assumption was that NATO always had a technological lead. We were just better at that stuff than the Soviet Union for lots of reasons, market economy, individual freedom, pursuit of research and that. And then they tried to steal our secrets and replicate our technology, and then we would move ahead. But of course, the world is more complicated now. I freely confess to that. And so how worried are you about the ability of countries like Russia and China to become sort of science and tech champions in their own right? Not just to steal from us, although undoubtedly through cybercrime that continues, espionage, but to innovate themselves, to pull ahead. The Chinese are investing vast amounts in AI research at the moment. I saw a report over the weekend that if you take the G20 countries, 3/4 of all of the subsidies for science and technology of the whole G20 including many NATO countries, are spent just by China. I mean, it's an awesome sort of figure. You probably saw this report from the Australian think tank that sort of 20 years ago, of 64 critical technologies, China was ahead in 5. Exactly. Now, apparently, they're ahead in 58 of the 64, which is quite remarkable. So, you know, what do we do about this? How worried are you? Can we catch up? Do we need to catch up, compete in that particular respect? And are the Chinese or the Russians coming up with things that, again, would cause you to have sleepless nights or at least lie awake for a long time?
I'm concerned. I do sleep.
Sometimes in your job, you need to.
Sometimes I also wake up a little early in the morning, and I think the Russian and the Chinese have, let's say, a long-term strategic view in this one, and the potential intentions to challenge the alliance, and they are very good at innovate with emerging tech, and China operates in different ways. The military-civil fusion, and maybe some of their strategic, let's say, views are geared by the government, steered by the government. Yeah. So they are in another ballpark figure here than we are. And for example, in this year, I think the Chinese will award more STEM PhD than
the United States or
other allies. And they are very focused on techs like AI, quantum, biotech, and stuff like that. And there are ethical and moral things we have to be aware of in those type of technologies. But also the war in Ukraine illustrates that innovation drives battlefield outcomes, and we should learn from that one. And if we, let's say, working together in the alliance, working together with and partners within the network of trusted allies, and bring all the talents, all the great ideas, test together, learn together, talk together, we will be strong. And then I will sleep longer in the morning.
So no despair, but no complacency, right? Yeah. No despair, no complacency. We still have strengths. I'm almost out of time, so two final things before we close, and I let you go back to your heavy responsibility. Now I do understand heavy responsibilities here in NATO. There's going to be a lot of extra money spent on defence in the next few years. I mean, the 5% target was set by NATO at the summit in The Hague. That's to spend 5% of GDP on defence and security by 2035. Even if not every NATO country reaches that goal, they're all making an effort to spend more. So lots of extra money flowing into defence coffers. Now, when you stand, as you do, like me, you look at the newspapers, you hear a lot about, buying more tanks, buying more aircraft, producing more ammunition and missiles, increasing the size of forces. You hear less about how all of this money, or at least some of it, let's say 5%, 10%, whatever, we could debate what that percentage should be, how this extra money can go also to improving NATO's scientific, defence, technology, industrial base. So if you were sort of able to access, let's say, 10 or 15% of all of those billions of extra dollars and euros over the next 10 years, how could NATO use this money to really improve its its deep science, fundamental science, its research base, those strengths that you mentioned that we need to compete with China, Russia, and others? I mean, do we need to create more science departments in universities, create more government research establishments, put more money into industry like the Chinese do in the form of subsidies? What can we do if more money were to be available to get the best out of it for NATO science and technology?
I would say, of course, we should do our best right now to update our capabilities. That's for sure needed. But at the end of the day, the capabilities we can buy on the market, on the production lines today, are based on yesterday's technologies, except if there are some fancy way of updating as you're using it by hardware and software, stuff like that. And there we see tendencies like this. But what should we buy? And is those capabilities we're having today, is that also prepared for the future conflicts? Or is that prepared or defined for current conflicts, current scenarios? And if I would come with recommendations, which I would really like to do, is that you should also use some part of those money to be prepared for the future. What will the next scenario look like? What will the next conflict look like? Are those capabilities we are right now buying,
the ones that we're going to need in 20 years' time,
for example, are they also fit for purpose for the future?
Yeah, understood.
Some might, some may not.
Oh.
Are we ready to just close our eyes and wait to see if it's as good? Or shouldn't we now, when we have the time, which we don't have much of, but we have the money we have, so maybe it's a time for invest in our grandkids and our grandkids' safety.
Yeah, it's very important, of course, for an organisation like NATO to produce the knowledge, the expertise, the good insights, but obviously you need political leaders who are willing to hear the message and willing to act on that message. How do you feel about NATO as a whole, with the political side of NATO, as being an organisation which gets science, which gets technology? I mean, obviously you don't expect a NATO ambassador or former NATO officials like me to understand all of the complicated things that you as a scientist understand, but you do expect them to sort of get it, as it were, in terms of the importance and a basic understanding, okay, this is what we need to do. Is now the political side of NATO, the top leadership, really now tuned into science and technology and listening to you in the way that you would want them to be? We call it speaking truth to power, where I come from.
Yeah, and I've only been here for, let's say, 3 months, but I can see the growing interest, and I have already met with numerous ambassadors, and they're quite interested in learning more
That's
what
good.
we are doing.
That's good.
And we have increasing interest participating, and that's the whole STO organization, participating in a lot of different conferences. Where can we put in? And last week I was at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Slovenia. And there I must say that the number of questions were enormously high.
The parliamentarians get it too, right?
So it seems like it's on their radar as well. And just reading the news, we now have articles on what's the secret behind electronic warfare, what is a signal processor really doing and stuff like that. I don't think those type of things were on the news, let's say, just 10 years ago. But now it's highest on the, let's say, the news of today and stuff like that. You put that in as breaking news, right? So I think the tech interest is increasing.
Yeah, that's good. So the knowledge, the culture.
The knowledge, the culture,
yeah.
And you should not be afraid of technology, because at the end of the day, it's just new systems. It's not new capabilities. It's new things. Yeah. But when things turn from technology to capabilities or systems, we don't call it technologies anymore. We call it a system you can hand on, look at, or feel, or something like that. So I think now is the time to wake up, also to invest in the future, and of course, building up capabilities is super important. We should do that at all what it takes, but also be prepared for the future.
Yeah. In the UK, Steen, we had back in the 18th century a very famous a politician and an author called Edmund Burke, a great father of sort of liberal conservatism. And one of the phrases that always struck me, he said that wisdom today consists in doing the things that men, he should have spoken about men and women, but this was the 18th century, men in 10 years' time would wish had been done. So when I interviewed Brian Wells, he was finishing his mandate as chief scientist, so I could get him to sort of reflect and look back on the 4 or 5 years. This is a bit unfair, I know, vis-a-vis you, because you're just starting. But if I could sort of project you sort of 4 or 5 years hence as you would come to the end of your own mandate and think of Burke, what are those things that men of wisdom would wish, had been done. In other words, what sort of legacy would you like to sort of leave? And therefore, what central message to the NATO leadership would you want to leave behind so that not only do people remember you as a good chief scientist, but everybody says, Sten, yes, he was the one who taught us to do that. So that would be my very difficult, slightly unfair, but irresistible parting question to you at the end of our armchair conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I think my vision is quite clear. We should be fit for purpose. We should have S&T for impact. We should be ready and have the foundation ready for developing future capabilities. But at the same time, underpinning, supporting, delivering the planned capabilities and also testing there's still how it should, while at the same time support the current activities, what's going on. So we should have those three types of views into this one. And that's crucial for me that we do this also for the science and tech. And with all this AI, quantum, biotech, synthetic biology and all that, how will that look? And science and technology trends sometimes, that's something for tomorrow, not for now, but there might be something in that could be tomorrow because those innovators, startups, they can grasp it like this.
Yeah.
And then it's a tomorrow capability, not something in the future. So we should continue focusing on doing the right thing right, making sure that we should support the future capabilities, the future way of warfighting, defending our systems with the, let's say, the power of the science and technology as a part of a deterrence.
Yeah. Well, Sten, messages only work if they're clear, as you know, and that was a clear message. So, Steen Søndergaard, NATO's chief scientist, many thanks indeed for engaging with me in this armchair conversation. I learned a lot. And I'm sure the viewers would have learned quite a lot as well. I think on behalf of all of us, i.e. the viewers as well as myself, thank you not just for being here today, but also for sharing your intellect and being open, honest, frank with us about the successes, but also about the challenges that lie ahead of the alliance. My impression is that the massive challenges, but you're onto it. And clearly you've got the organisation, you've got the vision, you've got the strategy. So in a world where there aren't many signs of optimism at the moment, maybe a glimmer of optimism for the future of NATO science and technology. Maybe you will, maybe you won't invite me back in 4 years' time or 5 years' time to sort of reflect on what you've been able to accomplish, particularly vis-a-vis the agenda that you've set out to today. But at least for now, again, on behalf of the viewers, thank you very much and good luck with your very important future endeavours as Chief Scientist at NATO.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you.